little bit of my background. I don't try to emphasize titles and things like that. I think what makes Jewish life most beautiful is it's all about relationships. It's about hearing people's stories and realizing we have incredible diversity in Jewish life, which is a hallmark of Temple Aaron, and that we come together with all kinds of memories, hopefully mostly good memories of our Jewish experiences. And we can get together at the synagogue or in other Jewish places, and we can just share the joy of so many different ways of expressing our love of Judaism. I was a congregational rabbi for over 25 years, and I loved my life in the congregation. But I found that I always had this feeling in my heart that one of the ways I wanted to help the Jewish community was to help the Jewish community build relationships outside the Jewish community. And I did interfaith work for quite a long time, uh, always believing that the security of the Jewish people in part depends on educating non-Jews about Judaism, so that we're not a mystery and people don't develop misconceptions about the Jewish people. And as a result of that, I found my way to doing work with the Jewish Federation. And when I moved to New Mexico a year and a half ago, uh, driving across country, we made a point of driving through Trinidad because I knew my whole life, since I went to rabbinical school, about Temple Aaron in Trinidad. Uh, because Rabbi Jacob Rader Marcus, the founder of the American Jewish Archives, served as the rabbi of Temple Aaron in Trinidad for many, many years. He was my teacher in Cincinnati, and he spoke often with great love about Temple Aaron in Trinidad. And he used the phrase, "It is a beautiful, saving remnant of Jewish life." And that was true uh, in Dr. Marcus's time, and it's also true now. And I would say the greatest honor of my life was being asked to become the rabbi of Temple Aaron in Trinidad. It's a beautiful group of people. Uh, the place, the building, I don't like to use the word facility, the home of Temple Aaron is this magnificent um, space. It's a beautiful space. And when you're there, you feel the generations, the presence of the generations that have been there before us. And so the first time I drove through Trinidad with my wife Loretta, we stopped in front of Temple Aaron. We took some photographs, and I told her the story of Rabbi Marcus, said, "I hope we're going to come here someday." And so our first Rosh Hashanah here in the Intermountain West, we came up from Albuquerque, and we spent our first Rosh Hashanah there uh, two Rosh Hashanahs ago. And that was it. It captured our hearts. And those of you who are really interested in stories of Jewish tenacity, Temple Aaron is that story. So why don't we go to the next slide? Uh, you know, I always teach that the purpose of Judaism is not to make the world Jewish, but the purpose of Judaism is to make the world better, to make the world kinder, to make the world safer, to make the world more educated, to bring more goodness into the world. And I have found that as long as we stick to that belief in tikkun olam, of repairing the world, um, then our survival will be guaranteed. It's amazing to think about. We are just 0.5% of the world's population, and yet we contribute so much good to the world. And that's because of our tenacity and our exceptionalism. And I think the survival of Temple Aaron is an important expression of that tenacity and exceptionalism, as I think you'll learn today as you hear the history of Temple Aaron. So let's go to the next slide. You know, I love to read the Torah this way, unrolled. This was this past Rosh Hashanah, And we unrolled the Torah, read the story of the Bible, chanted, and together the congregation said the blessings. We were all socially distanced, and we heard the story of the binding of Isaac. It's an amazing thing to see a Torah scroll unrolled. And I actually look forward to a time, maybe next year or the year after, we'll have a Simchat Torah celebration up in Trinidad, and we will open the Torah scroll from end to end. It's an amazing sight. But you realize the word Torah means instruction. And again, that's just a key word in reminding us that education is, above all, maybe the core value in Jewish life. And we are developing more and more opportunities for education here at Temple Aaron. And the next slide. So I do want to invite everyone to join us online. We're still Zooming. I call it Jew Zooming. We are Jew Zooming across the Jewish world these days. And you know, it's been amazing because we've overcome the boundaries of geography. This may not surprise you. Overall participation in Jewish life is up across the United States because we can gather across geographical boundaries and people don't have to drive at night. And eventually we really need to be back together so we can hold hands and hug and dance and just be in each other's presence, because, you know, we see the face of God in the face of each other. And so we have Torah study on the first Shabbat morning of each month at 10 o'clock. And then on the third Friday night of each month, we light candles and Kiddush. And we also say Kaddish, and we hear a story and sing some songs, and we schmooze. So you're all invited. It's the most open, inclusive gathering you could imagine. This next Torah study, the first Saturday in February, we're going to talk about the origin of the Torah. And we're going to look at both the traditional view of the Torah coming from Mount Sinai and how we understand that. And we're also going to talk about the scientific and literary theory around the origin of the Torah as well. And I'm sure it'll be a great discussion. I think you're in for a great presentation today by our board, who are the most dedicated, loving, warm, and friendly people. And we're just delighted you're here to share the story, and we hope you'll become part of the story. So all the best. Neil.
Thank you, Rabbi. I appreciate that. And it's a real privilege to be here, and it's an honor to have Rabbi on board. It's just, it means so much to have you here with us, Rabbi. So we really appreciate your willingness and interest and just your love and support. So next slide, if you would. I'm Neil Paul. I am the, I was out of the meeting and they insisted I'd be the vice president, whatever. So I'm the vice president of the group. It's not exactly how it happened, but this is actually the board that you're looking at on a larger screen. That's me to the far left, and in the top to my left on the screen, it's actually to my right, is looking at is Randy Rubin, president of the temple, Kim Grant, slightly above him, and then down David London, a real estate and business attorney out of Boulder, who unfortunately couldn't be here this morning. And beside him is Ron Rubin and Sherry Glickman. So we make up the board, and we're all very happy to, really happy to keep the doors open and the lights on at the temple. If you go to the next screen, please. My involvement was when I heard on public radio that the synagogue was being sold. Somebody had indicated on a chat just a minute ago that Temple Emmanuel came before Temple Aaron. That's true. There were a couple other synagogues in Colorado that came first. I believe the first one was in Leadville, but this is the oldest continuously operated synagogue. So, and I'll let the Rubin brothers talk much more about that. I was involved by David London. Actually, I used to be on the board of directors for the B'nai B'rith of the Rockies. David London came in, represented the Rubens, did a presentation about the temple at a B'nai B'rith board meeting. The board had a chance to adopt the temple. For various reasons, chose not to. Myself and a couple others, David London and Bill Berger, took a trip down to Trinidad. That's when I saw this sign, took that picture. Myself, just really quickly, I was born in Israel. The rabbi mentioned the survivalship of Judaism. You know, I'm a second generation survivor. Both of my parents were in camps. They were in Holocaust. So, you know, I have very strong interest in helping to see Judaism survive and prosper. This synagogue was put on the market in 2016. My background is real estate, home building development. I've been supporting the real estate world here for 30 some years. When I saw this building, I saw that sign in front of it, it was just, it was kind of overwhelming to see that we were in a position to have to let this building be sold to the highest bidder. Quickly after just walking through the temple, we spoke with the Rubens, with Ron, Randy, and their unfortunately recently departed mother, Kathleen, and basically pleaded with them to please take down a for sale sign and let us bring this knowledge to Denver, to, you know, more Jews around a community, whether Colorado or beyond, and let's see what we can do to save the building. It's an 11,000 square foot building. It's certainly not impossible to help keep it operating, keep it open, keep the doors open. At least, you know, our interest is really to hand it over to the next generation and let the generation 130 years from now decide what they want to do with it. So if you want to hit the next slide. Thank you. We were promoted a number of times in various publications, but I just want to give a quick overview. Trinidad, for those of you that have never been to Trinidad, it's halfway between Denver and El Paso and Santa Fe, New Mexico. So it's about 180 miles south of Denver. A beautiful ride down and back. And if you're heading to Santa Fe, it's a great stop. Next one. I fell in love immediately with just its craftsmanship. I've not seen a synagogue in my life. I've never seen a synagogue with a pipe organ, let alone the, you know, nothing locally, obviously regionally, with any sort of workmanship that this had. So I just really fell in love with the building quickly. Go ahead, Sherry. One other interesting element about the temple is the community at one point had an active cemetery. I mean, there's all, you know, all the reasons obvious as to why the congregation did have a cemetery. But if you want to go to the next slide. The last full-time rabbi, Rabbi Freudenthal, is laid there. And it's a really interesting place to tour if you have a chance to go into Trinidad. Hopefully you can see the temple. You'll want to notify us ahead of time to be able to get in there. It's not open on a regular basis, but also take a trip through the cemetery if you care to. It's interesting. Next slide. My first introduction to Trinidad, Colorado was probably similar to some other people. Back in the 70s, it was known as the sex change capital. And just by chance, this good Dr. Biber, Stanley Biber, was one of our congregants at Temple Aaron. So his spiritual journey and his life was also part of Temple Aaron's history. And he's done a lot for a lot of people. So let's go on to the next slide. If you have any interest in looking into that, again, you can see the craftsmanship. It's just, you just don't see these type of buildings around too often, especially to think where it's located in a western mountain town, so to speak. Let's keep going. Thanks, Sherry. This is what I saw of the building. It needs work. On the left side, you can see the original boiler, and on the right is the new boiler, which needs to be replaced as well. So the physical elements of the building are, as they say, the bones are great. It's a good, strong building, but there are elements that have to be addressed, and some of them have to be addressed more quickly than others. The boiler does need to be replaced. You can see the next slide there coming up. We have an issue with the roof. If you want to go to the next slide. We do need some roof work done. But all in all, for the most part, the temple is in really good shape. Go ahead and keep going. Oh, yes, I just wanted, I guess that was my real ending there, is just to let you know that, we're here to keep the doors open for the temple, and anything that anyone is interested and able to do to help support us or support, the temple for its future stake. There'll be more information at the end of this presentation if you'd like to get involved any further. And I'll just hand it off to Randy and Ron. They've been caretakers for decades, and go ahead, guys, you take over. Thank you, folks.
Thank you, Neil. My brother Randy and I, well, I'm wearing a purple shirt like, excuse me, I did in that photo of me. I just like purple, and it's a sign of royalty in ancient Rome. So I just thought it would be nice to wear this shirt again. My brother and I will be doing the presentation together, and we'll be speaking about our involvement with Temple Aaron since our birth. We're the last two, I guess, remnants of Temple Aaron who grew up there and are still on the board, of course. My brother is the caretaker of the temple, and he's done that since my mother moved to Colorado Springs and then passed away in 2018. So we'll talk a little bit about our growing up years, our bar mitzvahs, the congregation through the ages, and how the temple was organized as a Reform Jewish congregation in 1883, which was very, very early on. And since the very first day, thank you, Sherry, it's always been Reform, and women have had the same status as men. Randy, do you want to talk a little bit about the timeline?
Well, I think you've said the main part of what's gone on. There were Jews in Trinidad in 1867, as it said, and Ron and I were fortunate enough to know the sons of some of the original founders, the Moses and the Gottliebs, and they were part of our congregation when we were children. They were elderly then and got older as time went on, but they were the sons of the founders. That was pretty interesting. They had some good stories about it. And until the 80s, the Moses store was still active in Trinidad. So they're direct remnants, I shouldn't say remnants, direct line of lineage from the founders of the temple. Go ahead, Ron.
Yes, that's the lineage. The first, among the first ones was a man by the name of Jaffa, Sam Jaffa, who, did you say that, Randy, was also the first? Okay, the first mayor of Trinidad in the mid 1800s, as it says there, was the first mayor of Trinidad, and he was one of the founders of the congregation. So Trinidad has always had Jews who were important to the city and the surrounding community as well. And it was named after Aaron Jaffa, the father of the Jaffa brothers, as it was mentioned there.
May I interject something here? When Ron said the Jews were important to Trinidad, the original rabbi was Rabbi Leopold Freudenthal, had two sons. One of his sons was a prominent attorney in Trinidad, and he was the one who carried the enabling legislation from Trinidad to Denver to have Trinidad State Junior College established, and also established the community college system of Colorado. And the library at Trinidad State Junior College is named for him, the Freudenthal Memorial Library. So as Ron said, they played quite an important part in that area. The other brother was a doctor and was quite well known in the area, not only for his medicine, but also for his generosity to not just Jews, but to coal miners. It was a rough and tumble community, even into the 40s. It's a coal mining community. And if you know anything about coal mining towns, pretty rough and tumble.
Let's go to the next slide also. And then the Jaffa, Mr. Jaffa, who was the first mayor of Trinidad, I think moved to Santa Fe and became one of the first mayors in Santa Fe as well. So we have been spread to many areas of the country and have been illustrious in a lot of different areas. Unfortunately, Randy and I are still just regular members of Congregation Aaron, but we grew up there. And so this timeline will show you in the 1900s what happened with the Freudenthals. They started the Freudenthal Foundation in 1943 with $250,000, and it was which was a great endowment at the time, and it lasted until, as we said, the temple was put up for sale in 2016, and then we just simply ran out of money. The foundation just didn't have any more money in it. The people who we grew up with were Leopold Gottlieb, Gilbert Sanders, Albert Moses, and some other Jews in Trinidad. It was a wonderful, wonderful place to grow up. I'd like to talk a little bit about in the 50s, the Sunday school, and when we had our bar mitzvahs. So the Sunday school, when we went there were enough kids to have a little Sunday school. And there were, Randy, how many? Maybe 7 or 8 of us. Maybe
I think there may have been at most 10 or 11. There was a fair number. Dr. Biber's children were there. There was another Dr. Barglow, and then some other kids that I certainly don't remember.
Right. But so we would go over the past in the 50s, and our parents would take us over, and we would have a Sunday school for about 4 or 5 years. And Temple Aaron has always been critically important to us. Since when we were growing up in our early years, the only Jewish family in Raton, New Mexico, our parents, Leon and Catherine Rubin, made sure that we knew we were Jews in a city that was probably 80% Catholic, and we were the only Jewish family. They felt it important that we still had our Jewishness. And so after Sunday school, then a few years later, they felt it was important that we also have our bar mitzvahs. And so I guess the next slide we could tell you that it looks exactly as it did when we were growing up. It's never had anything that has been materially different that has been done to the synagogue. So when we go there, or when Randy goes there frequently, it is such an emotional time, especially for me, having grown up there when I was a kid. I don't know, it's always so emotional for me. But anyway, so then the next slide will show you 3 of our Torahs that we still have. One of ours, we unfortunately had to sell to try to raise money before we felt the congregation was going bankrupt. But it was led by lay rabbis on an ongoing basis. The temple, however, we had rabbis imported from the Hebrew Union College, and as Rabbi Lennick said, we had Rabbi Jacob Rader Marcus, who was a brilliant man and is highly revered at the Union, at the UAHC, Union of American Hebrew Congregations. And did I mention that it was reformed from day one, and so women always had the same status as men at Temple Aaron, which was a wonderful thing. Reformed Jewry, I think, came into existence in the mid-1800s, And since our congregation was founded in 1883, it was one of the early ones as well. And I have a book by Jacob Rader Marcus. I have many of his books. This one was called The Rise and Destiny of the German Jews. And at the bottom of this slide, you will see that it talks about Rabbi Marcus. He was, I think, the first president of the Union of American Hebrew Congregations, or of the Jewish Institute of Religion. And they named the American Jewish Archives for Jacob Rader Marcus. He was the first president, and he lived to be 99 years old. And we grew up with him coming to Temple Aaron, as well as other rabbis, Rabbi Sylvan Schwartzman, Rabbi John Feldman, and others, with the latest and greatest, Rabbi Rob Lennick. So it was, it was led. I don't know if he is still on the call or not, but our congregation was led. If you could go back one, Sherry, that would be nice. And if we go over, Sherry, please tell us that we've spoken too long, because we can go on and on about Temple Aaron. Leopold Sanders, who was married to, was, I guess, Gilbert Sanders' father, was there until 35. That's before our time. And then Gilbert Sanders was there until 1952 when he passed away. And then his wife, Beatrice Sanders, we called her Aunt B, led the congregation from 52 till her death in 87. And then our parents led it until 2016, at which time Randy took over then. Do you want to add some things, Randy?
I think it was actually, they moved away in 2011.
Yes.
Anyway, that's Ron mentioned Rabbi Marcus, and I feel very good about something that Rabbi Lennick is a direct line to him. He's always been esteemed in our minds, has been quite a rabbi. And the reason we got to know him as well as we did, he would come out from Cincinnati and spend about 11 days here, a day before, through the High Holy Days, and our family would entertain him and drive him to Taos, Santa Fe. So we got to know Rabbi Marcus pretty well. Would you go to the next slide? That's the congregation during some event, I'm not sure which, but that's how it is. Please note the two flower vases on the side of the
Bima.
The altar, the bima. And we had a rabbi that didn't like those because he felt he couldn't be seen by the congregation. So we had him take them down. And in recent years, we've put them back up. Kind of an interesting little side note.
Next.
This is the organ. It's a very old, it's an Estey organ, E-S-T-E-Y, and which is a very, very old organ maker and very highly respected. They don't make them anymore, but there is a museum in their hometown of Brattleboro, Vermont, and it still works and it still functions. And Randy, do you want to tell a little bit about the last time it was played for our last?
We had a delightful organ recital during the High Holy Days. There is a woman who studied music and, in fact, organ and piano, who lives in all places, Levita, Colorado, and graced us with her ability to play the organ. It was great. And she did it during Erev Rosh Hashanah and also Rosh Hashanah Day. So that was good. I want to mention something else in deference to the rest of the board members. I always thought those pipes that you're looking at were purely ornamental. I am wrong about that. Some of those pipes actually produce sound.
Yes.
I had to eat some crow on that one. We had the organ looked at last fall, and I just thought they were purely ornamental to hide the workings. Not the case. They do actually produce sound. As Ron said, it's an esteemed organ manufacturer. It was carted in from the railroad station to the temple on the hill by horse and buggy in 1922. It was brought together in pieces and then installed.
The next slide shows our mother, who was the keeper of the synagogue after B. Sanders passed away, and with us early, I guess that was probably 2016, 2017, maybe, Randy. And that's our father as well. Our parents who made sure that the temple was functioning well and were sort of keepers of the Freudenthal Foundation while it was still in existence. The next slide will show, we know a lot of these people. This was from, I guess, the 50s. This was the congregation when we were growing up. And our parents are the two in the front on the left as you're looking at the picture, our mother Catherine and our father Leon. But we know almost all of these people, all of whom have passed away. But those are the people who meant so much to us when we were growing up, and with whom we had such a close association, and which really, those are the people who gave us our Jewishness, who gave us the life of Jews, who gave us the feeling of what it was like to be Jewish, and really set us apart from others who, yes, it's pre-COVID dining. many years ago.
By a few months.
Yes. So this is a fond picture of us, not of us, of them. And there's a little picture of Leo Gottlieb. I don't know how to describe him in here, but he lived to be over 100. He was a 75 year member of Rotary. He shook the hands of 3 or 4 presidents. He was a wonderful, wonderful man. Most of the Jews of Trinidad, of course, were in business. He was in insurance. The Moses were in retail clothing. And the Seibolds had a shoe company. And so they were integral to Trinidad and to all the businesses, and they were well known, and they were very well respected. We've talked to some of the people in Trinidad who knew the Jews, and they always talk about them with admiration for their kindnesses and for their leadership and their genuineness, I would say. The next slide is of our bar mitzvahs. Randy, you want to talk about yours a little?
Well, that's me on the top left, and I'm with B. Sanders beneath that picture, and that's Ron in the larger picture. As Ron said, our parents were quite insistent that we have a Jewish education. I went down to Albuquerque and stayed with my aunt and uncle and 2 cousins for a summer, as well as Ron doing that. I did mine in 1962. Ron did his in 1964. Oh, it does. I'm sorry. It does say those dates there. The rabbi that we studied with was an interesting fellow, very rigorous, I must say. Not much fun for a 12-year-old boy. Very little, if any humor at all. And he put us through our paces and then journeyed to Raton and stayed at our house prior to the bar mitzvahs for about 2 or 3 days, and we practiced, had our bar mitzvahs, and of course he went back to Albuquerque.
Mine was the last. Randy is 2 years older than I am, and his was in 1962, as he mentioned, and mine in 64 was the last bar mitzvah or b'nai mitzvah or bat mitzvah until Randy's daughter, Nina, had hers about 30 years later. So you can see that the temple didn't have many members, and those who didn't feel as strongly connected to having life events as our parents did. So it was a huge thing for us to go to Albuquerque and stay with them and to learn with this rabbi, if only even for a summer. But every day we studied with Rabbi Scheinling. And it was a wonderful time in our lives. And I think a bar mitzvah means something, or a bat mitzvah or b'nai mitzvah means something to everybody who goes through that. And for us, it was extra special because we just didn't have a lot of association with Jews, other than when my parents would send us to Denver, Pueblo, Colorado Springs, Albuquerque, or Santa Fe to be with other Jews for ACA or BBYO, if you know what those stand for. So we did have associations with other Jews and relatives, but not on a frequent basis. So that's what it was like growing up at Temple Aaron. And I'm so happy that Randy still lives in our hometown. Our dad was born in 1916. No,
20.
he was born in 1920. And so he was born in Raton, New Mexico. And other than the 18 months he lived in Colorado Springs, he lived his entire 93 years in Raton. So the roots are very deep in Raton and Trinidad for us.
I would like to add something, and then I think it's on to the next. Growing up in Raton as the only Jewish kids in school was somewhat difficult. We would miss school in the middle of the week. And of course, most children ask other children, why were you gone? Were you sick? Were you ill? What happened? And it was a little difficult to think, a little difficult to say, well, I'm Jewish, it's the Jewish New Year. And that marked us a bit. Wouldn't you say, Ron, that we were not sick and occasionally we came back to school in our synagogue threads, meaning we were dressed up, and it did set us apart. And it was at times difficult to explain. My children, they had the same experiences in Raton in the 90s about missing school and other children asking them, why did you miss school? What is going on? Because they came back without any apparent illness.
Yeah, when we would go and we would be in our suits, of course we had a clothing store. So they would, kids would say, why are you dressed up on a Thursday in junior high? And it wasn't embarrassing, but I just didn't want to share for some reason, with good reason, that I was Jewish. I knew it wouldn't mean probably anything to them except that we were. I'd say, oh, my parents have a clothing store. And so they just sometimes like to have us dress up whenever they feel like it. So we would do that.
People in Raton knew nothing of Jews. We were an unknown quantity, even though our grandfather, excuse me, had been here since 1915. I was asked many times if I was Italian. Kind of interesting.
You look so Italian.
I do.
I think we've exhausted our time. We should go on now to Kim, who will tell you a lot more about the temple and what it represents, both architecturally and what we're trying to do in the future for it.
Thank you, Ron and Randy. Every time I hear your stories, I learn something more about Temple Aaron and Trinidad, Colorado. I've lived in Colorado for about 30 years, and my wife and I are long-term members of Congregation Road of Shalom. And I noticed some of my fellow Road of Shalom attendees participating today, and I want to give a shout out to them. But I always wanted to have a second shul, and I just never dreamed it would be 3 hours away in Trinidad, Colorado. But it is, and it's been a wonderful experience. My experience really began with Temple Aaron in my current employment. I work for Colorado Preservation, Inc. We're a statewide nonprofit preservation organization. We do advocacy and education and provide technical services to communities across Colorado. And the program I direct is called Colorado's Most Endangered Places. And the way that works is communities nominate sites that are threatened or endangered for a variety of reasons of having been lost. And in 2016, Temple Aaron was nominated to Colorado's Most Endangered Places. In 2017, when I started at CPI, I got involved with this project, which is very near and dear to my heart. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about the architecture of the building. If we go on to the next slide, it is a splendid exotic revival style building perched high on the hill in Trinidad. The facade elements include some really interesting features. There are two pyramidal towers. The one on the left has a peaked tower, and the one on the right to the north has an onion dome metal tower. There are also those finials that you see centered in the center of the building and on the far left that look a little bit like Torah pointers or even Torah scrolls. And there's a close-up of one of those a little later I'll talk about. But you can see that other than the offsetting towers, the building is pretty symmetrical. It's constructed out of brick and stone. The lower porch has stone porch supports and steps, and some work has been done on that. The arch over the porch, the lower porch, definitely needs some work, and is one of those things that we hope to address pretty soon. But it's a splendid building, and it was designed by an architect named Isaac Hamilton Rapp. And he was an unbelievable architect. I'll tell you a little bit more about him if you advance to the next slide. At the base of the building, there's also a cornerstone that has many of the founding congregants, including Samuel Jaffa and the Sanders families. And there's also a sign on the lower right. The synagogue was incorporated in 1876, or Trinidad was incorporated in 1876. The congregation was established in 1883, and then the temple building was constructed in 1889. Its architect in the next slide, as I mentioned, was Isaac Hamilton Rapp, who with his brother was a very prolific architect. He designed over 80 buildings in Trinidad, including some really spectacular buildings: the Zion Lutheran Church, the First Baptist Church, the First National Bank building in Trinidad, the Los Animas County Courthouse, Walsenburg High School up the road a ways, and a number of other buildings. And so between about 1890 and about, or 1880 and about 1920, he had already established a very successful architectural practice. But he is actually better known later on as the creator of the Santa Fe style. This book that I'm holding up is a very hard to find book. But if you've ever spent time in Santa Fe, you know that in the core part of the community, this sort of territorial adobe style architecture is mandated in the historic district throughout Santa Fe. And Isaac Hamilton Rapp was really the pioneer of that architectural style. A couple more slides real quickly show you some of the other elements: the colored glass windows, the beautiful porch or beautiful stair railings and balusters. As you go up, one of the things that's interesting about the building that makes it challenging now, though, is that the sanctuary is on the second floor of the building. So access is very challenging. My organization sponsored a grant application to the State Historical Fund, if you move to the next slide, that was successful, that will provide $50,000 for work on the temple's roof, which is a very complex structure made out of pressed metal. And the grant is for $50,000. The congregation is raising $30,000 in matching funds. And more recently, we also received a small grant for safety and security upgrades at the temple. And we know we need more money for the ultimate restoration of the building, as well as for upgrades for security reasons as well. The next slide shows a close-up of the South Tower, the pyramidal tower. If you look closely, you can see a very unique stamped pattern to the roof. And we have to replicate that and find people who can do that, and we believe we can. And also, if you look at the finials very closely, the middle part, the shaft, is actually metal wrapped around what's probably concrete to look like concrete from the ground. But it's just a spectacular building, a really unique, one-of-a-kind building. Probably the closest building to it in the Rocky Mountain West is the Temple Emmanuel building at 16th and Pearl in downtown Denver, which was also built in the exotic revival style. And I think that kind of wraps up my portion of it. Here's one more slide that shows the close-up of the onion dome, and there's actually a hole in the north side of the onion dome where a chunk of metal blew off in a storm, so we have to repair that. That was fabricated, in 1888. It's pretty amazing. And it stood up there for 130 years. And then I think my last slide shows you some of the elements of the roof that we need to address, including damage on the lower level porch roof and other places in the valleys of the large roof on the top. And there is one more slide of the south view of the building showing the beautiful brickwork, the stone lintels, and the windows. So it's an amazing building, and it is on the national, it's a contributing property in the National Register Historic District in Trinidad. And we're also trying to acquire national landmark status for it. And then the last slide is a historic photo that we don't really know the provenance of. It goes back a long ways. But it's a spectacular building, but as Rabbi Lennick pointed out quite eloquently, it's really the people that make up a congregation and a shul. And so through our activities that Sherry is going to tell you about, we're trying to kind of recreate sort of a new congregation of interested folks between Santa Fe and Boulder and everywhere in between who want to help us save this legacy. And the events are one way to get the word out about how to do this. So we welcome your support. And with that, I'll turn it over to Sherry.
Okay, hi everybody. Whoops. Okay, so I came into this, well, I'll say through Neil, my better half. He was, very early in the process of trying to, figure out how to save the temple when it went up for sale. And when he and David and Ron and Randy and others started working on it, the initial goal really was, how do we save it? How do we save it from being sold? How do we preserve the building? And, everybody decided, yeah, we're going to give this a go. And so they were working on it first. I came on a little bit later when they needed more help with some of the, just various tasks that had to be done. And what we found was, as Kim just alluded to or mentioned, it's a lot about the people and as much as the building. I think I was maybe really pleasantly surprised to find how many people came forward who were so happy that we were doing this. What you see in this picture here are 4 people who are direct descendants of the Jaffas, Henry Soule and Sam Jaffa. Those are 4 women in Colorado who, and New Mexico, I guess one of them might be in New Mexico, who didn't know that they had cousins. But, through the process of, becoming aware of the temple and coming to events, they were introduced to one another.
Sherry,
Yep.
Just a quick point about the woman on the right in that photo, Lisa May, this morning, she is related to Samuel Jaffa
Yes.
in some ways. And this morning she knocked on my door here at the CPI office and brought me this book that I just referenced. She
Oh.
managed to track down 3 copies of this book, and it is very hard to find. So
What-
I'm guarding it with my life.
What is the title? Because I can't see it.
It's called Creator of the Santa Fe Style,
Okay.
Isaac Hamilton Rap.
Oh, that's neat. Yeah. Yeah, I can't remember exactly which Jaffas. I have it written down somewhere, but I know you're right. Each of them is a direct descendant of one of the Jaffa brothers. Yeah. So we started having events in about 2017. We've held Passover Seders, Rosh Hashanah services. As you can see, this was from the Passover Seder in 2018. That was Rabbi Jack Schlachter, who is a nuclear physicist on the side when he's not being a rabbi. This was a fundraiser that we did. We chartered a bus and we had a historian, author, Phil Goodstein, He led us on a tour of abandoned synagogues in Denver. That was one of our fundraisers. This photo is from 2019. We had a very big event. We called it the Gala. It was a full weekend event. During this weekend, we had services, we had storytelling, we had music. The photo that you see at the bottom right with everybody sitting was during speeches and some talks. We had direct descendants from the founders of the temple speak. In the middle photo, you're seeing one of the descendants. Her name is Sarah. She was speaking. As Rabbi Lennick mentioned earlier, he had come to Rosh Hashanah services 2 years ago. Well, I guess, oh, that one says 2019. Sorry, okay, I'm getting mixed up. But that was an interesting Rosh Hashanah because we actually had 3 rabbis who wanted to come. So Rabbi Lennick was there, Rabbi Bernie Gerson, and Rabbi Shimon Molk, who he's a little bit obscured by the plants on the left. These are from another fundraiser event that we did here in Denver. Buckstein, he's the one smiling on the left. He's a Jewish cowboy singer, and he's the face of the Grizzly Rose, if you're not familiar. And he's a great musician. And Clay Kirkland is the one on the harmonica. We had a really fun evening. Another event that we did just in October, we screened the film Children of the Inquisition, which is a really amazing documentary about the history of the Jews from Spain and what happened to them during and after the time of the Inquisition. We were originally planning to hold the event in person, both in Denver and in Trinidad, and then because of COVID, we ended up transitioning that to being an online event. It's an incredible film, and I'll just make a plug. The Boulder JCC is going to be showing it in February. So if any of you have any interest in seeing it, we have information on our Facebook page about it, and we can also get it to you. But Boulder JCC will be showing this film in February. The temple has been the topic of a lot of articles. We've gotten a lot of media coverage. This is just a brief list of some of the prominent stories. If you want to see any of them, we have our own website and we have a news page, so you can look up and link to any of these articles. The one that's pictured, the Halapid, is a pretty extensive article. We were the feature of that issue. So at this time, during coronavirus, obviously we're doing a lot on Zoom like everybody. And this is kind of just recapping what Rabbi Lennick had said before. You are all very welcome to join us. We're having a Torah study once a month, first Saturday morning at 10 a.m. So our next one is actually February 6th. And also once a month on Friday evenings, you're welcome to join us for a brief Shabbat service. Also, I'll just point out, for any of you who are interested in knowing more or following what we're doing, we have a Facebook page and we now have a YouTube channel where we post videos. Last thing I will say, as Kim mentioned, we are in the midst of raising money to preserve the temple. So we're in the midst of what we're calling our 100 by 6 campaign. We're looking to raise $100,000 in 6 months. We're making progress. I invite you all to, check out our website. We keep it up to date. Let us know if you have any questions. And, thank you all so much for, taking time out of your day to join us.
Our operators are on standby, waiting for your call.
And I'll turn it back over to you, Rebecca. And I understand there may be some questions. So I will stop my share so that, let's see. It'll take me a second, but I'll work on that.
There was a great question asked most recently about what the maximum membership of the height of the temple might have been. Randy or Ron, do you happen to know, guess what that might have been?
Oh gosh, that's a hard one. When we were there, I would say we had maybe 15 to 20, but I think when the temple was organized, I read recently that there were about 40 to 50 males and 20 to 30 females. I think it was at most 100 around the turn of the century. Randy, do you have any idea?
Am I on? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
I thought there were 75 families initially. That was at the height of 75 families. And it was pretty well organized. Trinidad had a large mercantile population, of which Jews made up a great portion of that. There were other things too, the doctor and lawyer, of course. But I think maybe at the height, 150 to 200. That would be at the extreme amount. It dropped off precipitously after the 20s. The town suffered because of the coal mining interests declined.
But the town has had a recent resurgence. So if anyone
Neil,
would like to take a nice road trip,
I wanna-
Trinidad's a great place to visit.
I want to address that. There's a fellow over in Trinidad, you all might find this interesting, who he contends, let me rephrase that. He contends he's trying to bring Jewish folks to Trinidad, and he's brought one. And he's running one of the taverns there. And he's working on another family who was a teacher. Wally Wallace, that name doesn't mean anything to most of you, but he specifically told me Friday that he wants to bring Jews to Trinidad.
Mm-hmm.
And I found that quite interesting.
Great.
I think the community is definitely in a growth phase and things are looking up. So I would not be surprised to see that population slowly grow.
You know, there was also a question from Alice Caterlin. I think that's how you pronounce her last name. Are there currently Jews in Trinidad and Raton, if everyone saw this, who are members of the congregation? And there is a chiropractor in Trinidad who is a member, and he's lived there for quite some time. And then we do have some members in La Vida. And Randy, are there other members in Trinidad? It still is under 10, if you want to know.
There's just Larry Lowe. There's 3 in Raton or Raton area. That's about it. I think there are people who have Jewish roots,
Yes,
but have not attended any functions or have associated with us.
Doesn't everybody?
Well, and there's from Pueblo. I mean, I think what's amazed me is that every time we have events or services, people are coming from Boulder, Denver, Pueblo, Colorado Springs, Raton, Santa Fe, Albuquerque. People come from a wide radius. And we
We had a couple come from Chicago.
Yeah, and then we have people coming from out of state. We have people coming from California, New York, and the Midwest. And
Texas. Yeah.
every single event, every event.
There's a gentleman who's joined our Zoom Shabbat calls from Jerusalem,
Mhm.
from Israel. So yeah, we're getting.
Yes, mom grew up in Trinidad, yeah.
And as Sherry just said, there are Jews in the area, but for some reason, as Jews do in major cities as well, they don't identify themselves until they come to the temple and we'll say, oh, are you new to Trinidad? Oh no, I've lived here in Primero or some of the surrounding areas, Honey, maybe Aguilar or Walsenburg. I don't remember if anybody was from there, but they'll say that they're Jewish and they just haven't, Stonewall, they just haven't come much. And so I sort of feel bad because I wish they would make themselves known and be part of the congregation. But there are Jews in the area and they show up for events, but they really haven't become members.
We've also received support from local people who are not Jewish, but who grew up
Right.
with the temple as part of the community and value it.
So as all of you are speaking, I'm going to try and wrap this up because it was so fascinating. And I want to thank all of you, Rabbi and board members, for your time today. I'm just thinking ahead for post-COVID that maybe with Kavod on the road, we will take it on the road and come down to Trinidad. Maybe we can find a way to have a road trip. That might be a really wonderful experience for all of us. I know we can talk for hours on this subject. I know that questions are probably racing in people's minds, but our time is limited. So again, I want to thank you for your time. We'll be recording this. We have recorded this. It will post it in a couple of days on our website, and we'll get copies to you, Sherry, so you have it. And you know, if anybody has more questions, can they contact you directly, Sherry?
Absolutely. People can, we have an email, info@templeaaron.org. I'll just type it in here. And let's see, I can't type and talk at the same time, apparently.
On our website as well.
Yeah, our website is templeaaron.org. You know, our email is there. I can list a phone number as well. If people have any questions or want to reach out to us for any reason, you know, we're always happy to, you know, show people the temple when we can, if people are coming down to the area. We are planning to have something for Passover on April 3rd. We don't know exactly the details of how this is going to work this year because of COVID. Normally we do a full Seder. This year we can't really do that and be socially distant. So we're going to come up with another creative way, but we will be doing something for Passover this year. So
May I say something? If anybody's interested and they're coming down privately and I'm available, I'm more than happy to open up the temple and give you a tour. Trinidad's a fun town in addition to seeing an interesting original 1889 building. Thank you for your time and your interest. This has been grand.
thank
Thank
you.
Thank you all very much. Have a good rest of your day. We appreciate all of you.
Long-
Thank you for everyone who spoke and attended. It was wonderful to see you, and we hope you join us for a future program. And there's information in the chat for any follow-up who would like you. Thank you, Rebecca, for hosting us and learning so many wonderful things today.
Thank you so much.
you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Day.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Take care.
Shalom.